welcome to BitLyft. I'm Casey, and today we're talking about cybersecurity survival for small security teams. Here with me today are BitLyft founder and CEO, Jason Miller, and our director of SOC, Mike Skeeth. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll get right into it. There's an estimated 463,000 job openings in cybersecurity today. Mike, how do you think we might go about making the most of a shrinking security landscape?
First, I'd like to go back to that number of 460 whatever thousand empty positions and stop thinking that we're ever going to fill those and start realizing the problem of making the most of shrinking security teams is because they're always going to be shrinking. How do you make the most of the technology and the resources, the assets that you have today, to not try to someday we'll fill this gap, but just realize this is the gap and how are we going to continue forward now with it? And one of the big key pieces of that is partnership. You want to go into that a little more, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. You know, we work with a lot of colleges and universities, right? And so if literally there's close to 5,000 colleges and universities across the U.S., but not all of them have a cybersecurity program, right? But the ones that do, you know, are literally probably like, let's say 10%, even though the number is lower than that. So you have 400, colleges and universities that have a cybersecurity program. So, and then most of them have somewhere between 30 and 60 students right out of them. So if you just do some math here, right, we're going to come up with about 1,000 to maybe 2,000 students a year, that graduate out of United States-based higher ed, right? So then 463,000, number, we're going to be a decade or two away from producing, so we need to encourage more folks to be going to school for cybersecurity. But we're decades away from even coming close to producing that kind of number. And when you think about it, partnerships are extremely important in this. And I'm not talking about like partnerships in the sense of a company buying another company and forming a partnership that way. This is like truly getting to know, an MDR and XDR provider, letting them know your business and you sharing your business model with them so that they can craft the proper protection and the proper security policies and procedures and detection methods and detection models around your business, right? This is going to be far more effective for the dollars that you have and the team size that you have, rather than you having to go and build it all yourself. We just see it time and time again where organizations went and hired people. They went and procured all of the cybersecurity tools that they thought that they were going to need. And then what happens is that, somebody leaves the company and then next thing you know, the tools are starting to get stale and they're underutilized and they're not performing to their peak performance. And then so what happens is that ransomware or some sort of an event happens that automatically says to the organization, hey, we need to find some subject matter expertise outside of our company to come in and help us out.
Right. And it sounds like this isn't just a one-faceted issue, and the outlook continues to be a little bit grim in terms of how are we going to take care of this issue, especially like Mike alluded to with a job deficit of 463,000 that we really can't take care of in the next decade.
Yeah.
So, and I'm glad you let in with this, Jason. There are solutions that we have to be looking to that are outside of just putting a body in a chair.
Absolutely.
So, in the spirit of that, let's get into a little bit more of the detailed portion of it. One thing that I want to bring up, we're living in a digital age, obviously, where pretty much any device that you have is connected to IoT. It's an Internet of Things device. My thermostat is connected and I can change the temperature of my house at any given time. That's a device that is connected to the network. So Jason, how would a team go about securing an ever expanding network in a small basis?
I think that you have to start off with first a question of how am I going to be able to do monitoring and detection across that expanding network? This is oftentimes people jump to tools first, a conversation around which tools should we go and use and procure. And although tools can help you, but oftentimes, you're running into a dark room and you're in a knife fight. And I use that analogy is because we run into conversations without first whiteboarding and understanding what are we trying to solve, what are we trying to protect, where is it, and what is it. And then once we have identified the who, the what, the where, then we can start to go out and maybe look at some tools and some services to help come alongside of us. But I've used that analogy before, and it seems to really resonate with people that, we just jump in kind of like we run into a dark room and for a knife fight is because we go out and procure tools. And then we think that the tool was going to be this universal, Swiss Army knife, and it was going to do everything that we thought it was supposed to do. And we didn't really realize along the way, we went, oh yeah, let's add that. And, oh yeah, let's add that. And, oh yeah, I forgot about that over there. HR's using this tool over here. Then we need to add that into as well. And we hold the tool or we hold the service provider to these unrealistic expectations, that like, oh yeah, we said that in passing somewhere along the lines. So the small team, we really need to make sure that we've kept each other within the right expectations of we've identified it, we've put it out there on it's in scope, and we can truly address it. I don't think anybody, especially at the cybersecurity companies that I've met, we're not like looking to mislead customers, and so oftentimes what happens is that, the customer comes and says, oh yeah, we gotta manage and monitor and detect and protect that thing over there now because the business went and procured it, and is like, oh, well, we're going to have a hard time doing that because, it's sort of outside of scope or it wasn't, we need to actually go get a different tool to help us with that. The tool that we're using today was within inside of this context. And now that thing over there changes the context of it. So the expanding network is always going to be a challenge for us. We're consuming cloud and we're consuming SaaS apps at an exponential rate. And so when you think about the exponential rate of the consumption of those, we are going to have to make sure that we understand the tool that we're using here today may not address 100% of our needs, as we continue to evolve that business. And we want to make sure that we have the expectation that it's going to expand. The tool might expand and change. And we also want to have the expectation of fluidity, where things are fluent. They're fluid. They're fluid with this sense of the software may need to change. We may need to change the tool. We may need to allow for new integrations to happen in order for that expanding network to be covered.
Oh, yeah. It sounds like it's a lot of preparation and a lot of planning in terms of what you can tackle with your security team and what you should tackle with your security team. Yes. I want to pivot a little bit. We mentioned this kind of in the lead in about ransomware, and ransomware is obviously a huge hot button issue right now.
Yes.
So obviously it causes crippling devastation in organizations. It locks us out of our systems, and businesses can end up paying a lot, or they have cyber insurance and cyber insurance has to pay a lot. So how do you think, Mike, specifically, how do you think the threat of ransomware is continuing to grow and evolve, and how can a small security team stay hot on that issue?
So for the small security team, you really just have to do the basics first. Let other companies be the low-hanging fruit for ransomware attacks to continue to surface on. We continue to see it in the news. This company got ransomed. That company got ransomed. This attack type or this attacker group is hot on the news now. They're pretty much doing the same thing, and it's because you don't have MFA and you don't have EDR. You get those things taken care of, and you make sure that you know where your internet profile is. How is your company seen? How are you touched on the internet? Where's your websites at? What ports do they have open? That kind of stuff. But take care of that basic hygiene, and you're not the low-hanging fruit anymore. So let's make these ransomware attackers grow their skill set to go beyond just those that don't have MFA and that don't have EDR. And let's see what they can do then, and let's solve that problem later.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I would see most of the ransomware attacks we see are on the low-hanging fruit type of misconfigured environments. And so, if you're watching this and you're trying to understand, well, what does that really mean? Like Mike is saying, having no anti-malware or a old antiquated anti-malware antivirus agent on your endpoints, you could be that low-hanging fruit, right? If you have misconfigurations on your network where you've got ports open that shouldn't be open, or your users really are still clicking on everything inside of email, and they're not paying attention to getting phished. If you don't have the ability to understand when a account is compromised on your network, that is putting you into that low-hanging fruit category. These detection methods today, you really need to be able to understand when something is processing on an endpoint or when an account is compromised on your network, and you need to know within seconds, because time is of the essence. They could be grabbing, you could have mimikatz, on your systems literally within minutes, and it's grabbing credentials and it's grabbing things that the users are typing on your endpoints, and that is getting sent out the internet in real time. And you're not going to have a lot of time to respond before your environment is encrypted.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I mean, there's increasingly less Liam Neesons in the world to protect us against the ransom. So like Mike said, and Jason added on to, it's important to make sure that you're not the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
So just very simple security measures can keep you out of that ransom scape. So we talked briefly in the lead-in about tools. And I was watching an old webinar that you had done, Jason. You had a big bolstering graphic up, and there was quadrants in the left and the right and the bottom and the center, and lines going across every which way. It was like the Always Sunny in Philadelphia meme, where Charlie's on the board, his mind's everywhere. So just seeing that, there's obviously literally thousands of cybersecurity tools out there. And when you're a small team or even a team of one, we run into all the time. How do you make sense of the sheer abundance of these tools, wrangle them in, and see what's best for your organization? Jason, what do you think?
Well, I think this is a great point to talk about, because we as IT people, we quickly want to say, oh, we need this tool and we need that tool and we need this tool. And I love working with all these tools. It's what we do as IT people, is we get excited about the tools that are in front of us in using them and then what they tell us, right? But we need to be careful, because we see a lot of our customers have more tools than what they can really successfully manage, what they can effectively keep under control and manage on a day-to-day basis. And then there's quite a few of those tools that get implemented about 10, 15, 20%, and then something distracts them, takes their priority. They maybe go home for the night at 6 or 7 o'clock, and then the next day they come in and there's a fire and they're distracted. And next thing you know, the tool that they were working on implementing, they get pulled away. And so what happens is you eventually get tool sprawl in the environment. And that tool sprawl, this tool over here, it ends up telling you this, and this tool over here ends up telling you that. And next thing you know, as a human, you have to then stitch together what all of these tools are telling you. And the human mind is good at it if you have the time, right? And then you can, but it's time-based, right? And what we really need to do is have tools in the environment that are as close to 100% implemented and configured, and they are doing the best of their ability. And then there's some tools that we should never bring in under the organization or the company's management. We should partner with another company that's a subject matter expertise. And that's all that they do. And we should procure those tools and the service from them, because we have to have a realistic understanding about how much we can actually manage internally, and then what is good to procure as a third party outside. And we as BitLyft even do this. It would be ridiculous of us to think of that we can manage all of this stuff inside of our own house and then still provide an excellent service to our customers. It's just not possible.
Yeah, it sounds like it has a lot to do with mitigating what you can handle and what you can't handle.
Right.
Which is obviously important for small security teams.
Yeah.
In kind of pivoting back, we talked about tools, but obviously there is a strong human element behind the tools. And that seems to be the resources that is not of abundance. We talked about thousands of different tools that are available, but we also talked about the gap in how many people are available to do it. So, obviously with the massive labor gap, there is a high risk of burnout among not only your security team, but your IT team in general. So Mike, being, director of SOC here for us at BitLyft, how do we go about handling that so we can give our IT employees the work-life balance that they actually deserve?
And, limiting those stressors. So even back to the overabundance of tools, that alone could be enough to cause people burnout, because they have to not only use all these tools and know how to use them all, but then always be looking out for, is this still the best tool, or has it been leapfrogged by another tool in the market? And that's where we would take care of a lot of the cybersecurity tooling off your plate. So you don't need to worry about, is this the best tool today? Because we're in the background building out new tools or technology to solve those issues, so you don't have to deal with it. And then your cybersecurity personnel internally or your IT people can focus on what they're supposed to be doing, making sure the network connects so that whoever needs their laptop to work works, and the security aspects of those connections and those systems can be on somebody else that probably that IT person is working with, but it's not their objective to go work with all the tools and all the security and all those pieces.
And I would even say to that point is automation is a huge gap filler. I said gap filler, which means that there is a ton of things that we do as humans that we love to do on the mouse and keyboard, and it creates job security. But there's a reality to this, and the way that we're trying to tackle this 463,000 job openings today is that you've got to bring automation to the table so that the security analysts and the people that are doing cybersecurity on a day-to-day basis, you're not doing things that are mundane. We're not doing incident response manually. We're not remediating compromised accounts manually. There is automation that can help speed those things up, and you should never have to do those manually. And we need to look to more automation in reducing the workload that we shouldn't be, manually today. This way here, it allows us as IT engineers and network engineers and security folks to focus on the higher value things that automation still can't really do for us today. That, maybe in time, automation will help us do quicker, faster, in a better way. But we need automation today, and we'll need automation in the future. It's like when you look at car factories, right? There's areas in the car factory where a robot works really, really well, that it would wear out a human being's joints, their mind, and the human's capabilities. But a robot makes extremely good sense in that way. Picking up heavy things, repetitive tasks, things like that. The same type of thing is applicable here in cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that manufacturing space right into it, Jason, because so many times we think about production in a manufacturing space, and we don't see a lot of our information technology in the same way. But as you said, the same way we look at robotics in terms of manufacturing, CNC machines, part movers, those are tools that help a assembly line and a manufacturing line become more efficient with less labor. And the same bodes in the cybersecurity scape as well. So I really appreciate that addition to it. One thing that everybody knows, and we can get ready for the eye rolls on this, boys, but we got to talk, if we're going to talk about small security teams, we have to talk about budget. With the state of the economy the way it is, and many experts predicting that the worst is still yet to come, this means that there's looming budget cuts along the way, or non-expansion of budgets for our IT teams. So how do organizations go about protecting themselves while still being conscious of their budgets? Jason, what do you think?
Well, thankfully enough, our customers, since they consume us as a SaaS model, we can be extremely flexible in a budget cut type of situation. We can help them look at, the logs that we're consuming in their environment. We can maybe get more efficient with the logs that they are sending us, and maybe reduce some log volume in some other areas. But if you're not in that shoes, and you're being stressed, or maybe you're having to go and reduce that budget spend someplace else, what I would really encourage you to do is put a list together of all of your tools and your services that you're consuming today, and start to understand which are the ones that are providing high value to you that you could not live without, that doesn't add more risk to the organization. Because when you're looking at budget cuts, whether it's an IT ops or an IT security conversation, you have to bring risk into this. Which ones are going to increase the risk? If we reduce this or eliminate this, what's our risk going to be? So first off, I would say, you would not want to reduce or eliminate something that is doing monitoring, detection, and response in your environment if you're already a small security team. Because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be assuming all of those responsibilities back on you as the small security team. And then you're going to have to look the business in the face and say, if we get hit, it's me sitting here, right? And I still need to take vacation. I still need to sleep. And also I'm not just doing security all day long, right? So you want to make sure that the business understands and realizes the risks that they're going to be taking on as we maybe make decisions around budget and budget cuts.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put that. I'm sure budget cutting is something that we all need to be cognizant of going forward in managing through the next wave of the economy the way it is.
Yeah, it's always the fine line of balance between nice to haves and needs to haves, right? And the things that are nice to haves, you might have to cut back on the things that were superfluous in the system, but the bare necessities, we need to discuss how we can keep those.
Right. Yeah. So, we talked about budget. We talked about labor shortage. These are things that are not just, only something we're dealing with in the cybersecurity scape. These are things that we're dealing with as a productive United States society. One of the big things that, COVID kind of brought to light was some supply chain issues. Supply chain is important not only for us in the cyber world, but hugely important for all production and manufacturing based businesses in the United States. We're experiencing this very heavily right now. So Mike, something I kind of want to throw to you on this. We're a very dependent society upon supply chain, and not just in a national standpoint, but in an international standpoint as well. Is there a palpable fear of future attacks on our supply chain infrastructure?
Yeah, I think all along the way of a supply chain, there's weaknesses that could be exploited. Really just depends on what specific facet of moving information or moving goods and services that we want to talk about, but they all have weaknesses. And, we talk about oil pipelines, or we talk about railway, or large truck moving, or on the coasts and the ports that bring in goods. Physical vulnerabilities are huge for all of those, and as well as cyber. So
we talked before we turned the cameras on a little bit about we're in a rural area here in St. John's, Michigan, and farming is a big part of our culture around here. And Mike, you were bringing up a lot of different attack vectors in the farming sector. Like, how are those going to affect our supply chain?
Right. And how many farmers are thinking about the security of the IoT that they're using to plow the fields now? I've never heard of one. Not that I spend a lot of time there, but I've never heard of one thinking, oh my goodness, I need a cybersecurity team or tools to protect my farming infrastructure. And, that is a concern. However, the attack may actually come from a different type of supply chain attack that we weren't talking about here, but I'll move it to that now, is in the code that they're using. When a malicious actor embeds bad code or takes over the code pipeline, and now it's a supply chain of the code that's going to that tractor. And so now it's spinning out of control because someone updated it with a bad update. So how do we protect from that, and how do we trust that we are using good technology that is protecting itself? So, basically at the app layer, who's controlling that and giving us that application? How are we trusting and validating that they're protecting themselves so that we're protected?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because who would have thought 10, 15 years ago that a combine becomes an IoT? And then the fact that, we're talking about small security teams here today. Imagine, a farming operation. And Jason, you probably know this better than anybody with your chestnut trees that you have. Your organizations that are running these basic levels of the supply chain are people that might not even be IT-minded people. So it's hugely important that we know there are vulnerabilities all along the supply chain. So protect what you can with your own organization, and really get a deep dive into how that is affecting us all along.
You just had to bring up Chester's Nut Farm, didn't you?
Well,
I mean, I think about this a lot too. That the farming community, it really isn't IT people, but yet they're embracing and consuming technology extremely fast. We see it. Whether it's tractors that have GPS systems and drive themselves, and can update themselves through over-the-air updates, and whether you're a green tractor or an orange tractor, right? They're really adopting digital, and they're embracing it. But one of the things, if I could go back to just the supply chain attacks and the attack vectors, you have to look at the headlines that have looked out, whether it was Colonial Pipeline, around the oil and gas in all of their pipelines. I mean, one simple ransomware shutting down the pipeline for as long as it did, right? And so that pipeline then supplies oil and gas to not only consumers but businesses, and just the domino effect, that trickle down effect that it had on the economy, surging in gas prices, people like literally running out of gas on their way to the gas station. The images were all over the TV, right? Then you come over to software, supply channels, and how bad software was injected into good software, and the good software was deployed to customers, thousands of customers, with literally malicious code sitting inside waiting to be deployed. And so we have to really understand and ask ourselves, what is the software that we rely on as a business for our day-to-day operations? And if that software was used maliciously, what impact would it have on our business, right? And so these are sometimes the conversations or the thoughts that are quickly skipped over. But you'll start to see this happen more and more often. And I hate to say it, but there's been successful evidence of this happening inside of even just the US economy, but also over in Europe, where that has taken place. And so we need to be able to, as organizations, we're left on our own defenses to defend ourselves against these types of things. So we have to do everything that we can to monitor and detect these types of activities, and when these activities are in place, to be able to defend ourselves against them.
Yeah, that's important. And you heard it from the mouth of the farmer right there. It's that stuff. But you bring up a good point in terms of, we're responsible for governing ourselves.
We are.
In terms of this as organizations. And one break in the chain along that can ruin an entire supply chain and an entire structure, especially if it's something that we're so dependent on, like fuel or food.
Right.
So the question then comes, where is the compliance coming into play here? We've seen at least some bolstering of cybersecurity infrastructure funding. I know the White House just passed some legislation to add some for SLT government organizations. CMC or CMMC just pivoted to CMMC2. So there's a little bit of evolving along that landscape. How do organizations go about preparing themselves for involving compliance? Mike, how do you think that happens?
Well, one of the biggest problems in being compliant is the manpowers necessary to overcome compliancy. So we talked about shrinking security teams. Well, who's responsible for compliance? It would probably be a compliancy officer in your company, but that also sometimes becomes part of the security team, because a lot of it is procedures and processes and logging, and it ties into the security tools. So you just throw it on the security guy, right. And now he's getting burnt out because he's got to do all this other stuff. And then with compliance, now you're required to have different applications. So you're now maybe vulnerable to a supply chain attack because you're trying to be compliant. So there's just web of issues that could come with it. So having good overall hygiene on what applications do you have, what services do you use, and there are now quite a few compliancy frameworks that help put all that together for you. So at least it could take over quite a bit of what you're being required to document and overview, so that you can do it once, manage it and monitor in that tool, and then continue to monitor yourself and your business as time goes on.
Yeah, and I think it was, I mentioned CMMC versus 2.0. One of the things that they did was knock it down from 5 compliancy levels to 3 and make it a little bit more user-friendly.
Right.
And, user-friendly is a big thing, especially in terms of, small security teams. Yeah. Because you might be the IT department and you're running 200 users with you and 2 other people. So, it comes a lot to talk about user resistance. Yeah. We've always had that one person in the organization who is voted most likely to click on a phishing email. So, Jason, how do you think a small security operation can handle user resistance?
I think we've got to be willing to educate the users in a way where they are going to receive it. It's got to be open. It's got to be friendly. And most people, once you explain to them the reasons why we're doing what we're doing, it's not to make your life or your job more complicated or more difficult, but it's to protect the company. It's to protect your paycheck. It's to protect the operation of the company so that we can sustain operations and make sure that payroll's met for everybody, the coming, payroll period. If we don't take these precautions around cybersecurity and educate the users and bring the users along with us on the cybersecurity journey, well, then the risk of the company being halted or operations being halted or a all hands, because the company's encrypted and ransomed is extremely likely, right? So we've got to share with the users why we're doing what we're doing, bring them along from an education standpoint, show them the risk. Most of the time, I've heard from users being at conferences that once they were explained, like why we're doing what we're doing, they were on board. If they really understand that the risk is as high as it is, and it could mean that if we don't do these things and the company is ransomed, that we could miss payroll. Well, all of a sudden their ears are perked up and they become passionate about it. Cybersecurity today is not just this little thing that we're talking about, back in the corner anymore. It is a out in front, in your face, real problem that is all the way, it can touch family members, it can touch children, it can touch, your loved ones, it can touch the business that we rely on for our livelihood, right?
And don't forget, if there's always the least secure person in the company, there's always the least secure person in your family. And if there's only one of you, it's you.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? That ties perfect into some thoughts of summation here. It sounds like what we're talking about, the most powerful things organizations can do, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the majority of organizations in this country and in this world are operating with small teams.
Yes, they are.
That's not a foreign concept to us. So you knock it down and you bring it all together and you say, what is the most important thing a team can do? What I'm hearing is that it's to stay ahead of everything so that you don't fall behind and have to try to keep up after things have happened. So just kind of in summation, what do you guys think? Is that true? Is that not true?
Yeah, it is very true. But sadly, we already gave you all the challenges for why you can't do it. So you need a partner. You need someone to watch your back, to work with you, to continue to hit these challenges. And you also need to be aware and start to do some reading in your spare time, just to keep cybersecurity awareness somewhere in your purview, because you don't have to know all of the issues that exist, but just as a news feed, throw in some followers on Twitter or whatever, just to start to see that being given to you through social media or whatever.
Right. And Jason, I mean, you have your own newsletter specifically on laser focusing on cybersecurity. Do you find that to be congruent with what Mike and I are saying in terms of staying ahead of the game?
Yeah, I think everybody that is probably listening or watching to this is probably, you're saying, well, how am I supposed to stay ahead and keep up when I oftentimes feel like I'm falling behind? And that is the challenge, for everyone. I think it comes down to a couple things. I think about, the one that we may all know all too well, which is time management around areas that we need to know that we need to grow, right? So I specifically set time aside in my week for continuing education. And it's got to be consistent across each week. Otherwise, I'll feel like I'm getting behind, and somebody in our SOC engineering team will say something that, I haven't heard or haven't seen of, and I'll be like, okay, well, can you share that with me, right? And so it's the community of staying connected on topics, but it's also around what podcast or what Twitter feed or what type of news outlets am I watching or listening to on a consistent basis. That's the biggest thing. So if it's time management, but it's also consistent basis. And so that I'm consistently learning, consistently reading, and trying to make sure that I understand what am I actually protecting, how am I protecting it, and am I doing a good enough job? And I think asking yourself that challenging question of am I doing enough job, or we as a team, are we doing a good enough job protecting this? And once we could say, maybe I'm not, right? And that's okay. That is a valid answer, that we might not be protecting this adequately enough. And sharing that with the business, everybody has got limitations. And once you can identify those limitations and share with the organization what our limitations are, that is when the company can start to make a decision, okay, we need a partner in this area that we don't have today. And you are putting everybody in a good spot. Once you are, you wouldn't go to the gym and say, hey, I can pick up 500 pounds on your first attempt at the gym. You have to know your limitations, verify and verbally acknowledge those limitations, right? You wouldn't go run a full marathon right out of the gate. You've got to work up to it. And so these are things we can relate to physical things in our physical life. And we need to be able to take those things and apply them to the digital security that we're all trying to do today.
Right. And I think that is the perfect way to sum it up, Jason. No matter what you are currently doing with your small cybersecurity team and your small cybersecurity budget, it is something that is becoming ever important to stay cognizant of.
Yeah.
Obviously we work in this space, we understand it, but not everybody would. We talked about your farmers who's got an IoT connected tractor, or anybody along the way of the supply chain. Mm-hmm. So it's important, and I'm glad you brought up. Do your research, dedicate some time, learn. For more information on the subjects that we talked about today, but just everything that might help your small security team, visit us, follow us, go to BitLyft.com. There's tons of useful content specifically related to small security teams that we like to pass along to not just our partners, but the general public. Yeah. And I know that's something that's very important to our mission here. So on behalf of Mike, Jason, and myself, thanks for joining us. And we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you, everyone.